the shared experiences, they're worried more about their family members who are undocumented. And then also, how is it that folks who have DACA, for instance, how is it that they're going to be able to manage the next few years? There's a lot of worry in terms of are my family members going to be okay?
Welcome again to Chino Y Chicano. I'm Enrique Cerna. Uncertainty and anxiety. That's what many are feeling as Donald Trump prepares to return to the White House. Add to that unpredictability, a hallmark of his first administration. We're seeing that now with the people he's nominating for top positions in his administration. All of this only adds to the uncertainty and anxiety. So how do we handle it? I called up a good friend of mine, Karla Blanco, who holds a Ph.D. in psychology from Washington State University. She's also a psychology professor at San Diego City College. We talked about how her students are handling the uncertainty. Many are Latino who are concerned about the talk of mass deportations. And as we talked, it became clear that Karla is also concerned about her own status. Even with that, she provided advice about handling what's ahead. Karla Blanco, thanks so much for taking the time to join me to talk about, I think, a lot of anxiety that people have these days in the wake of the election. Obviously, I think the people that supported Donald Trump are quite happy, but maybe they are also wondering kind of what's ahead. And for those that didn't, there's a lot of anxiety. I mean, I hear it every day from people that are either saying that they are afraid of what's ahead, the unpredictability and not knowing, and then with some of the cabinet members being that will be nominated, that only adds to these things. What are you hearing from your students, particularly in the wake of the election?
Yes. So it was actually it was a tough week to teach after the election, just given my own personal sort of feelings that I was managing, and then trying to have a classroom conversation in my classes. It was an interesting thing to go into. But this is not the first time, right? This is the second time that we are kind of having to manage these types of conversations. From my students, the conversations that I had with them, and there were students who were kind of quiet and just didn't want to share much. And I could tell that they were probably in support and they were happy about the results. But there were actually a lot of students talking about their own anxiety, and also how is it that sort of what is it that they can do to be able to protect their loved ones. I think the majority of the students, at least in San Diego, in my classes, I can't speak for anybody else, but from the shared experiences, they're worried more about their family members who are undocumented. And then also, how is it that folks who have DACA, for instance, how is it that they're going to be able to manage the next few years? Because it is maybe themselves are not worried in terms of like they were born in the US, although we don't know what's going to happen with that too, right?
Right.
There's a lot of worry in terms of are my family members going to be okay? Are they going to be able to um are they going to be able to continue in this country and with the protections, some of the protections that they receive from DACA? And if not, what is that going to look like, right? And
Yeah.
how can we manage all of that? Because there's a big potential that families are going to be separated for sure, right? And so how is it that they're going to manage that? So they're kind of working through that
Yeah.
and
So,
trying to figure out what their role is.
you
Mhm.
know, you have practiced in the past as a mental health counselor. Uh,
Mhm.
so when you hear these types of things, uh, is there, uh, what do you tell them?
But
Is it all about just listening
right.
right now or what?
Uh-huh. Well, part of it is listening, and then also talking to them about how is it that they can protect their mental health, right? How is it that they can protect themselves in the midst of what's going on around them? Because all you have to do, the reality is that you can just walk on the street and somebody can say something to you, right? And we know that people are experiencing that as well. And so they how is it that they can protect themselves given that there's no sort of rule to this, right? There's no sort of book on how to manage this. And so some of the things that I talked to them about in the past when I used to provide counseling was hearing them out, right? Listening to their stories, validate how it is that they're feeling, because oftentimes they share this sort of like, okay, I don't even want to leave the house. Is this actually like, is this an okay feeling for me to have? And the reality is that yes, that's something that people are experiencing right now, where they're even afraid to leave home, right? And so it's the reality that they're living in. And so some of the things that I would work with them on is how is it that maybe they can lessen sort of the amount of information that they receive, right? That maybe they can get off their social media for a bit. Maybe they can figure out ways in which they can kind of engage in this self amorcito. I like to call it this sort of self love practice where they can focus on what is it that they can do to be continue to be a good human being, given the context that they have to endure right now. And so so we worked a lot on that, and it's just sort of this idea of like, let's practice self-love, self-care, so that we can so that they can kind of live day to day with this sort of unknown.
Tell me about the makeup of your classes. I mean,
My classes, oh,
yeah, yeah.
most of my students, actually, I love teaching at City College because most of my students are they are non-traditional, so they are older. I have students who are older than me. I have a few students who are maybe 17, 18, and the majority of them are in their kind of adult life. In terms of ethnicity, the majority of our students are Latinos. And so I get to work with a lot of Latino students on campus, and I get to be in the classroom with them. And so we've had very deep conversations in the class about what is it like to be a Latino walking in this space in San Diego, right? Where I mean, we're lucky that there's a mixture of people everywhere. Like I have students from all over the world, and yet we still have folks who we're going to disagree with, right? And so so I talk to them a lot about how can we find some similarities as well, right? How can we work together? Because the reality is that we're still in this space, and we have to function together, right?
Yeah. Now, you came across the border.
I
Um,
did.
yes, and talk a little bit about that, about how you came to the country and basically settling in, because I would imagine that what you know that what that feels like,
I
this
do.
anxiety and being undocumented and how you
Yeah.
handle that.
Yeah. Okay. So I think so many years when I came to this country, I was 15 years old. And so being 15, right? We think that we know everything, and at the same time, we're so anxious in general, right? And so I came here at the age of 15, and actually San Diego was my first spot where my mom lived at the time. And so I crossed the border, that just I crossed from Tijuana. I was able to like the way that I did it is I jumped the fence. So I literally crossed the border. And this was at the age where a lot of the identity crises were happening, right? Or just kind of forming my identity and trying to figure out who I was. And then now I get taken away from my country and the people that I love the most, which were my grandparents. And then now I come to live with my mom and my siblings, and in a different world, a world that I didn't understand literally because I didn't speak English. And so I lived in the back. So this is like in the 90s, right? Early 90s. And so what I do notice the difference is that now there's some folks who have those protections, such as DACA, right? That didn't exist back in the 90s. And so what that was there was this sort of identity of like, I want to be invisible, and I want to not be seen. I cannot tell anyone what my status is. I am so afraid and that somebody is just going to basically disclose that I am undocumented. And so it was this sort of idea of like, okay, how can I be more invisible to everyone around me, right? How can I walk into my classes without people knowing that I'm undocumented, and what would happen if they did find out that I was undocumented? And so later, I would say most recently, maybe in the last decade or so, there's been a little bit more of a movement of like being undocumented and unafraid, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm actually curious now that you're asking me this question. What's coming to mind right now, I'm curious as to how is that going to change their identity for our undocumented folks, and actually being if there will be a kind of a transition to, I don't want people to find out that I'm DACA. I don't want people to find out that I'm undocumented, because who knows who is a safe person for me to be able to share and disclose this information to, right? And so I'm curious to see what would happen.
There's so many unknowns here because we don't know, although they say that the
Mhm.
administration is saying, well, we want those that are undocumented that have a criminal background.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that families might not be, they might get scooped up in this. We don't know if even naturalized citizens are going to be scooped up in this and when they actually
Right.
do something. So there's so many different
They're talking
levels of
about that.
anxiety.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, they're talking about that, and that's the thing is like, okay, so how safe are we, right? So for instance, I was undocumented, right? I am not a U.S. citizen yet. So what's going to happen to somebody like me who does hold the privilege of having documents? I do have my residency here in the States, but how is that going to impact somebody like me? And then also my children, because according to whatever it is that this administration is going to, it's talking about, or some folks who are have run, things like um the immigration services, like they are talking about what was it, what is it called, the denaturalization of folks, right?
Mm.
So even for those folks who are naturalized citizens, how far back are they going to go? Right? Are they going to go just one generation, two? What year? How are they going to make those decisions?
So are
Um,
you worried? Are you worried
I'm
for?
worried. Yeah, I'm worried. I have to think. And actually, I had a conversation with my family, because it's like, okay, so what happens if they do take my documents away, right? So if they do that, what then, right? And so we have a plan to, like, we're gonna go to Mexico. That's where it's gonna be, right? Like we're gonna have to.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
that's the first country we will end up at, right?
Yeah.
That's another thing, is like, how do we know, like, if my kids are also going to be, because my kids then are considered anchor babies, right? According to some
Because
of
your kids were born in the US.
the kids were born
And
in the,
what about your husband?
my husband was also born in the US.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
so
So
all of that, nobody knows if
we
that's
don't
going
know.
to give
Right.
you.
Right. We have no clue what's going to happen. I don't even know, because I was supposed to have, I was supposed to do like the all the paperwork for my citizenship, which I had done it in the past, and because I had moved, I wasn't able to go through the process. I needed to reapply again. And so I was about to do it, and then now I'm like, do I hold for 4 years? So that, or do I still submit my paperwork? Is this the good time for me to be able to submit the paperwork, right? And so again, it's all these levels. I am privileged that I do have my document, like I have my status here in the country. But even with somebody like me, we have no idea what's going to go.
So when you say you have your status, so does that mean you have a green card
Yeah,
or
I
what
have
is
my
that?
green
Okay,
card.
you have a green card. So you don't know whether that's going to be good enough.
Right. No, I have no clue. Right. And so here is somebody who, like, I'm thinking now that we're having this conversation, right? Like, I am a professor here in San Diego. I'm also I mean, if I wanted to, I could be, I could get into back to private practice, right? Or back to being in clinical services. um And so I am somebody who is doing something in this community, right, in our country, and even somebody like me, we have no clue um, what it's going to look like, and that's the reality that we're living in right now, right? When we're talking about,
And if you look at your background, you came from someone who came across the border, had to restart your life as a 15-year-old, get
mhm,
reacquainted to your mother and other siblings. You
yeah,
eventually got a PhD from
mhm,
Washington State University, go Cougs.
that's right.
Um, so, or Vamos Cougs.
Yes,
You know, you're you're um, you're contributing to society. You're contributing to America. You're helping young people get their education.
yeah,
Uh, what more do you need to, I mean,
right,
but
right,
this is what
right,
gets me. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So
right,
what are
right,
you
and I
telling
didn't.
what are you telling yourself about being anxious?
Right.
Yeah, no, really.
What am I telling myself of what?
Yeah. How do you deal with your own anxiety, or
Right.
are you feeling that yourself and your family?
Oh
Well,
no, no.
obviously you must.
I am definitely anxious. But again, the way that we there's levels to this, right? Like I think that that's why I say that, obviously the conversations that I'm having with my husband and my family are very different than those conversations in families who are their folks are undocumented, right? So I
Right.
want like there is a distinction in there. In my family, what we've had is like, one, we're not watching as many news anymore. I am like, I if my husband wants to watch the news, I'm gonna step away for a bit. Like that is not something that I'm going to engage in right now. I need a little bit of that peace and quiet and not hear all of this stuff. I do read articles every once in a while, especially those related to immigration and what it's being said. And I have been reading some things about like what was going on with our community. What were the reasonings as to why folks were voting for somebody like Trump, right, in our communities. And so I was trying to understand part of that. But other than that, trying to remove myself from watching the news and watching things because my anxiety, I noticed that it was just going really, really high. And so I needed to do that. And I also needed to make a plan, right? And so that's like I shared to you before I talked to my husband. I was like, hey, like something happens, we know already we're lucky in some sense that we can just pick up and go, right?
Yeah.
We live
Yeah.
across, and I even told my kids, right, like we talked to each, we all, when we were all talking, I was like, well, all we have to do is just drive across, 15 minutes and we're in Mexico, right? We're away from this, so we also have that privilege. But I think that having a somewhat of a plan, and that's what I will also tell families who are managing this right now. There's always sort of like it's almost like a oh, I forget what it's called. There's actually a name for it, but it's almost like a safety plan, right? Like
Yeah.
what
Yeah. Yeah. It
uh
is.
and so in and figuring out, okay, what happens if X, Y, and Z, right? Like what happens is in general, because I don't think, because we don't have specifics right now, that's where the anxiety sort of creeps in a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't have something that we can say, oh, this is exactly what they're going to go for or who they're going to deport. And oftentimes folks are thinking, or most of the folks who voted for somebody like Trump, they thought that, oh, they're going to pick up, the people who are doing crime, right? That's who they're going to deport. But what do we know from his history from when he was president? Look at how many families were actually separated. Who Look at how many children there are still children who were removed at the border from their parents that have not been able to get back to their families and reunited with their families.
Yeah.
We already know that, right? So how is it that then we can manage that piece? How can
Well,
we
we have
then?
to remember the images of the children that were
Yes,
um, really caged,
right,
and
right,
then and then
right.
try all the drama and trauma of trying to get reunited with their
Yeah,
families afterwards. So, and we also have to look at American history in the
right, right.
30s when there was a mass sweep and
And it was you and
Americans of
uh-huh,
Mexican
uh-huh.
descent that
Yeah, yeah,
also
yeah,
were deported. Uh,
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't know. And the challenge is that we also have, so who do we think when we think of an undocumented individual? We think
Right.
of somebody that looks like us, right? That's who we think of. But we don't know, right? Like, and we don't see all the like the lighter skinned folks who are actually undocumented, folks who are from Asia, for instance,
Or
from
from
Africa.
Europe, from
Right,
Europe.
right, right. Or I was gonna say, no, yeah, which is, I don't know if this is let me say this. I'm thinking I've had conversations with my friends too about, okay, so if he goes back, if the immigration, if this new if Trump's administration talks about anchor babies and talks about denaturalizing some folks, right? How far is he gonna go? Because his wife is also
Yeah.
it's right. His kids then are also like my kids,
Yeah.
right? And so how far are you gonna go? And are you protecting certain folks and then not protecting some, right? Which is probably part of what we're gonna see.
Yeah.
Um,
The other thing about this, I've met your husband, and he was in the military. He
yeah,
served time in Iraq, and
right.
he still is dealing with the trauma of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And that's another layer to it, right? Because when you think about military families, most military families or military personnel, they tend to lean more Republican, right? They tend to lean more with Trump. And so here we are in a family that does not lean at all in terms of uh, voting for Trump, right? And the family members that we know or people who we know that are his friends from the military that are supporting Trump. And that's just, again, it's just, it creates not only whatever it is that he's managing from the military, but also on seeing some of his family members even supporting somebody like this, right? When what he often refers to is like, okay, well, yes, I did join the military. Yes, we do, like, and the folks that I know and everything, and we were fighting for supposed freedom, right? And here we are, uh, voting against all of this,
right,
right?
right.
It's just a yeah, it's a somewhat of a confusion there. Yeah.
So how do you handle it within your own family? And how have you, what's the relationship been like? Have you had to kind of
Oh,
curtail those relationships or
I
just like, hi, Primo, but let's not talk politics? You know what?
No, no, no. I don't know. The family members, we're actually going to see some family members today that there is a potential that one of the family members that's showing up to this family gathering is somebody
Mm,
who is very happy about Trump winning. And what I've decided to do with that part of the family, those particular folks, what I decided to do is just to skip under no connection. I don't contact them, right? But also if I'm there in their social media, just to skip them right away because I already know what they're going to be sharing. And if they, like, one of his cousins, for instance, supports Trump and actually sends some information to my children and me, because we're the ones on social media, my husband's not. um and so he'll send us things and we just don't reply, right? We don't even open it, we don't reply, like, that's it. And so just to not give him that sort of boost that he's making a point, because we're not even going to let him make that point.
right.
So today I talked to, I told my husband, I'm like, are you sure that he wants to come over? Because this is going to be interesting. I don't know that I can stay quiet for too long, right? And so but and and that's part of, and another thing that it's coming up, it's the holidays, right? And the
Right.
holidays are coming in with a lot of folks who are gonna have to, some folks don't have the choice, right? Some folks who are living with their parents, for instance, right? They don't have the choice on who comes into the house, right? And who is supportive of this person or not. Because what I notice is that the younger generations are less likely to be supporting this administration versus the older generation. That's also another sort of point of conflict for
Yeah.
families, right? Yeah. And so I don't know. You keep asking like how I handle it. And I think that the sort of um I would rather not see it, right? So just kind of like dismissal or just kind of put it away, and maybe sometimes I just pretend that I just didn't see that just to go, because block it, right? Because if not, you internalize those things, and when we internalize all of that, we carry so much weight.
Right. Yeah.
And I can tell you, like, as an individual, for me, if I was to, I do carry all of this. Obviously, I'm anxious. I don't know what's gonna happen. I'm already planning, right? So I'm taking care of these things on my end, but I still have to teach, right? I
I
still
was
have
going
to
to say
prepare.
you can't get away from this because it
No,
seems that in
no.
some cases, really, you're teaching psychology, you're teaching
I
future
am, I
psychologists, psychiatrists, that and they're looking to you for maybe
They are.
advice and direction because you've been there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I do teach a class which is an intro to counseling class, which is teaching folks who are in their very initial steps into getting into the mental field, right? Teaching folks about um the core sort of aspects of counseling, right? And so and when we're talking about working with folks and sort of the initial kind of like actually, I mean, the core things that we need to have, part of it is like the empathetic listening, right? Like
Right.
the actual active listening, the actual sort of validation, right? And so how can you validate someone who you don't agree with, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some
Right.
clients are going to bring that out in you, right? I remember when I used to work in the University of Idaho, I was providing therapy to folks who were showing up with Trump hats and Trump, shirts, right? And I had to still like try to focus on and learn to focus on what they were sharing with me, not the differences between my political views and theirs.
Right. That wasn't your job. Your job was there to help
No.
them in whatever issue that they were having to
And
deal, but you got to separate that. Yeah.
right. And but it was interesting to have discussions with them about how was it for them and how did they experience therapy with me, right? In the room with them,
Right.
right?
Right.
Knowing that we probably like, because they at this point we had talked about our differences in political views, and for them it was like they were still sitting in session, and they were still, so I was curious about how they felt with me in the session and being helped by somebody who they disagree with,
Right.
right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
with with my students, I try to talk to them about that, right? I try to, and again, they're in their initial steps, and it takes a lot of work and years to get trained on this, but you still have your own bias, right? And so you have to sort of be confronted with that and still attend to what it is that they showed up to therapy for, not their hat,
Right.
not their what they're wearing. So yeah.
We are in an unpredictable time and so much uncertainty that you know there's really no telling as to what's going to happen here. So obviously, you and I are going to have to keep in touch so that I can follow your story and you can tell me what you're seeing more of. And by the way, can
Yes,
I, since this is a session, can I bill you for this? I mean, I should be able to, right? Okay,
that's
yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
bill
yeah.
you. I
Oh,
can.
yeah, you can bill me? Wait.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wait, okay. Well, if it'll make you feel better, we'll
Yes,
do
yes.
that. Well, so I think we're in a situation here now where really it's like we have to wait and see.
Yes,
And in the midst of this, that's got to be part of what you teach.
yes, yes. Wait and see. And also, you just reminded me, talk to your loved ones, talk about what's going on, even if it's, I talked to my classes, I told them this is not a good day for me, like I am not happy with the results. I want
Yeah,
you to know that, not because I want you to agree with me, but I want you to know where my conversation is coming from, and I'm human, right? So I get to experience all of these emotions as well as your professor, but talk to people. Like, I've talked to a lot of my cougs. We
yeah,
have a very, as you already know,
yeah.
uh, actually, my most dear friends are all cougs, and we have these conversations. We check
Right.
with each other. How are you doing? Where are you at? I heard this in the news. Can we talk about this? Right. And
Right.
we do that. We do that. And so I would also recommend for folks to do that and to check in with their loved ones too.
Right.
Because I think this is sort of a time for us to be collective, to really work together to help each other out. And for
Right.
those of us that have privileges in terms of some sort of in terms of immigration, right? Like being like whether it's residency or you're a US citizen, this is the time to show and protect those that don't, right? And so I think it's important for us to have these discussions with each other.
Right. You're part of a group called La Alianza at WSU. It's an alumni group of Latinos that graduated from WSU that are professionals now, and I know that there's a real strong connection there. But I do think you're right that as hard as this is to talk about, it has to be discussed and plans have to be made, like it or not, and then we have to see what happens. What I do want to do is let's stay in touch because I think, particularly after the first of the year, we might have some indication of really what's going to happen. I'd like to hear what you're seeing and also what you personally are experiencing.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, all
I
right.
would love to do that. Let's do
Okay.
that because this is just the start, right? It's going
Yeah.
to be very challenging
All
for you.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, Karla, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me and really to
Thank you.
tell me your story, which I think, uh, people out there probably going to be able to relate to. They may not be psychologists, but the whole idea of making plans and wondering what's next, they're there, right? You're with them, they're with you. So, yeah.
And don't forget that self-amorcito.
Yes, self-love,
Self-love.
self-love.
That
Yeah. All right.
self-love, please.
Okay.
All right.
Karla Blanco, Dr. Karla Blanco, thank you very much for taking the time, and we'll talk more later. Take care.
Gracias.
The Chino Y Chicano podcast is available on your favorite podcast provider.
You can watch the video version on YouTube and Converge Media, a leading producer of culturally relevant content in the Pacific Northwest. We'll talk more later.